Sniper fire, gunfights, rockets fired in the city. A battle across a dividing line that dates back to the civil war that ended in 1990. Two longtime enemies turned part of Beirut into a battleground. Bullets bounced from buildings as people ran for cover, and children evacuated from school.
We moved the children to lower levels, and then we waited until the parents came to take their children. The children were going through panic and fear. They cried and screamed.
A large army deployment failed to control the situation. Supporters of Muslim Shia political groups Amal and Hezbollah were hunkered down in Shia neighborhood. On the other side of the street were the supporters of the Christian Lebanese Forces Party. There were casualties, many of them civilians hit by stray bullets, some while hiding in their homes. The clashes are now in their third hour. It is one of the most serious bouts of violence in recent years. The tensions were over a judge leading an investigation into last year's explosion at Beirut port. Hezbollah and Amal say the confrontations began when a Lebanese sniper ambushed protesters making their way to the Justice Palace, where they demanded the removal of Judge Tariq Bitar. They blamed the Lebanese forces for the attack, a charge the group denied.
The real threat lies in the use of weapons and in those who have targeted peaceful demonstrators. There were peaceful demonstrations everywhere during the past 2 years, but we have not seen such an attack against them.
The dangerous escalation followed political tensions over the investigation, which has already paralyzed the government. Hezbollah and Amal are threatening to pull their ministers, which means an entire sect would be absent, in violation of the country's sectarian power-sharing agreement. The opposition is accusing Hezbollah and Amal of staging a coup and using arms to impose their will.
Ever since Hezbollah's arms no longer had any function except fighting wars in Syria or assuming Iran's agenda, and now imposing on the Lebanese state what the justice is allowed to do and not to do, what a judge can decide or can't decide. And they're drawing red lines around ministers who are corrupt and accused, and they're saying they are above the law.
The guns eventually fell silent, but it further divided an already polarized society. There appears to be an undeclared truce, but the crisis is not over. Demands for the judge's dismissal have not gone away. Those against him say he is politicized. Those who support him, and that includes the families of victims, say he is among the rare judges who aren't politically affiliated in a country where there is a culture of impunity and those in power act above the law. More than 200 people were killed in that blast that destroyed neighborhoods.
What happened today was a show of force by Hezbollah and its allies, essentially giving the Lebanese public a false choice, either stability without justice or justice but no stability. This is just the latest in a series of attempts by Hezbollah and the ruling elite to undermine, obstruct, and block the domestic investigation into the Beirut lab.
The balance of power is not in Judge Bitar's favor, but he did try to take on the powerful, which is almost unheard of in Lebanon's history. It pushed the country to the brink and brought back scenes from a turbulent past that may have been a warning of what might come. Zana Khudr, Al Jazeera.
Well, Lebanon's President Michel Aoun has condemned the violence and says those behind the attack will be brought to justice. The army remains deployed on the streets and 9 people have been arrested.
We will never allow anyone to hijack the country. What has happened today will be followed on both levels of the judiciary and the security, and the investigations will reach the reality and the truth and the facts. Those perpetrators will be taken to the court. The investigation of the Beirut port blast will continue because it's a commitment towards the Lebanese people and towards the international community based on the independence of the judiciary.
Well, for more, we can speak now to David Kenner. He is a fellow at the Institute of Current World Affairs, and he joins us live now from Beirut. Sir, thank you so much for joining us here. We know, of course, you've had a very difficult day being in Beirut. We'll talk about your personal experience later, but just from a more analytical point of view, when we see the sort of escalation that we've seen today, political tensions moving on to the streets, what do you think were the particular sparks, or do you think it's just an accumulation of tension that, of course, Lebanon has lived with for a while now?
Well, of course, thank you so much for having me. I think the spark that set this off was Judge Bitar's decision, obviously, to try to question Ali Hassan Khalil, the former finance minister. Amal and Hezbollah have increasingly been critical of Bitar and increasingly considered this investigation basically a conspiracy against them. And their show of force on the street was a way of saying that this investigation cannot continue on its current path. There's obviously many things that piled up before then, but this was the spark that set this off today.
Lebanon famously has a sectarian power sharing agreement, which of course in many ways contributes to some of the deadlock sometimes. But the Lebanese people are facing a terrible time. The economy is imploding. Inflation is sky high. I think about 80% of the people live in poverty, have been reduced to poverty. What reaction have you sensed among the people that you've spoken to today's violence? Do you find people still falling along sectarian lines, or do you find a general revulsion almost with the leading class?
You know that's a great question, and there's both. The people that I've talked to in my neighborhood are exhausted by the situation. There's no more than 2 or 3 hours of state electricity a day. There are no jobs. The everyday trip to the grocery store is more expensive. People detest this political class at a fundamental level. At the same time, there is sometimes also the feeling that, okay, the entire political class is bad, but you know, my sectarian leaders are the only ones who can even provide me with the very basics of survival. So it is complicated, and you do get both opinions.
One of the things that was most shocking, of course, about the violence today is sort of where it happened, just a kind of normal neighborhood, obviously, with people there, and then the impact across Beirut. Tell us how you lived through the day as the violence started.
Of course. So we knew that there were protests scheduled from yesterday, and that it could be a violent day. We live, thankfully, fairly far from the sites of the violence, though we could hear some of the rocket-propelled grenade fire from our house. You know, it started out like a normal day, getting our son up to get ready to start the day, and then by about midday, we realized everyone needed to come home, and we would spend most of the day sitting at home where it was safe and as far from the violence as possible.
Because the schools actually called, didn't they, asking you to come and pick up your child? Oh.
And you know, we are. Sorry, Lebanese internet. We are very similar to thousands of families living in Beirut at this moment, where schools had to send the kids to the basements or send them into the hallways, anywhere that is safe, until the parents could come pick them up. And this is especially traumatizing because Lebanese schools have been closed for pretty much 2 years. From the protests in 2009 to the COVID pandemic. And now with this, you're really just seeing a lost generation that in some ways echoes what occurred during the Civil War. It's incredibly tragic for millions of people.
So how does tomorrow look for you? Are you going to go about your normal life? Are you going to take your son to school? Are you going to go out and about in Beirut? How do you see your future? Obviously, not just tomorrow, but literally in weeks and months to come, the way that things are developing.
Yeah, of course. Well, tomorrow's a national day of mourning, and we got a message that school is closed because of that. So we'll be staying at home. And it's life in Beirut for a lot of people is becoming increasingly segregated and increasingly confined to places that people know are safe and are predictable, the homes of family. There is just a lot less going out and travel than there used to be. I moved here for the first time in 2005, and you got around the country, you saw different parts of it, and it's just not like that anymore because of security, because of the economy. It is really tragic.